So first thing I wanted to share with you today, just real quickly, let's see if I can find it. So this is the command prompt in Windows. So if you go down to the search bar, the lower left, type command CMD, this will appear. And I'm in a small directory here, just a couple files. There's a utility I just wanted to show you called certutil. And if you do -# file and then dash question mark, it'll come up with it, how to use this. But basically it's hash file, your input file, and then you can specify the hash algorithm you want. So I could do hash file, let's say I had an a.out in there, and it tells me that's by default it uses SHA-1, which is horrible. But if I could say, hey, I wanted to use a SHA-256, that's the hash for the SHA-256. And so it's a convenient utility for doing a lot of different things. But like I said, just creating hashes, I want to show you that these exist in different things. The other one this does is because it deals with utilities. What I did is I went to Windows when we had the University of Idaho window opened, and I clicked on the certificate on the lock icon to see the certificate. I saved it to a file, a .cer file. And then I can actually do it like a verify uidaho.cer. And what it does, there's a bit here. It goes through, tells you, who issued it, what is the SHA-1 hash of the name, the MD5 hash of the name, other things, the contact serial, the certification serial number, different flags. And it just went through and checked everything, looked at the parent certificate and the parent's parent certificate. And so it does a verification list, goes through all that information. So the utility could do a lot of things. There's actually, last thing, the certificate revocation check passed. It's an end entity certificate here. So the full chain passed. It completed successfully, so there was no error. What I should have done is gotten one that didn't work to show you. But the idea here is there are utilities available for checking certificates, for creating hashes, for creating keys for yourself. So those are things you'll be able to play with at some point. All right. So let me get that going. Any questions? All right. Hopefully there are none. Okay. Let's see. So what I'll do is just move to Chapter 6 material. So Chapter 6 is talking about laws, compliance, and let's see what else we got. Regulations. Now, by compliance, and you're going to run into this when you work in industry, it typically means satisfying the requirements of one or more laws, regulations, or contracts. You're working for a customer who you have a contractual obligation to do something with them, or a business partner, you've worked in agreement with them, you promised to do certain things. So compliance fits in terms of all of that. Companies have to be in compliance with usually more than one set of rules. Often you'll be in compliance, for example, and I'll get to this in another slide, but if you're doing credit card transactions, there's the payment card industry standard for compliance. And so there's a list of rules what to do there. If you happen to work in healthcare, you have to follow the HIPAA laws. And so what you do is you look at all the different rules they have. And usually if they differ, they differ in strength. For example, one may say you must keep audit logs for 6 months. Another one say you must keep transaction or logs for a year. And so you pick the one that's more strict, a year. You keep them for a year, even though one says only 6 months. So this is typically the way people do things. Ultimately, your business partners, auditors, the compliance bodies, the regulators have the ultimate say and whether you are compliant or not. And so, yes, you met the rules or not. So what are these rules? First, there's what we call regulatory compliance. These are laws actually specific to your industry. So the Federal Energy Regulatory Committee, this is what regulates the power grid and anything connected to the power grid. They actually follow a National American Electric Reliability Corporation standard. So NERC put together these standards, which includes a section on cybersecurity, and FERC says you must apply the NERC rules so we can license you to operate your utility. If we don't license you to operate the utility, you're out. The Federal Aviation Administration, whoops, there we go. The Federal Administration follows RTCA. RTCA used to stand for like Radio and Technology Corporation of America or something like that. It now has the regulations for things that aircraft. I mean, they deal with propellers, they deal with engines, they deal with software that runs on the aircraft, etc. And the FAA says we're going to certify your plane to fly if you follow these requirements. Health and Human Services follows the HIPAA, which I realized I spelled. And the Security Exchange Commission follows Sarbanes-Oxley, etc. It's normal to have what we call a cyclical process or audit as part of this. You will regularly be audited to see if you're in compliance and maintaining compliance. It's not a one-shot deal. So that's the regulatory and the law. There's industry standards as well that are not laws, but may limit your ability to do business, like the payment card industry, PCI, a data security standard, DSS, not DDS. So that standard says how you handle credit cards when you're between your website and the provider, or between even your swipe card machines, etc. Any device, any piece of software that reads a credit card and sends it in for a charge, you follow these rules. And if you don't follow these rules, you'll have your permission revoked for doing this. It's not illegal to not follow the rules. They're just not going to let you, because it's a business partnership between you and Visa, you and MasterCard, or Visa, MasterCard, American Express all team together to put together this standard. If you're out of compliance, you may lose privileges, you may lose your license. There are criminal penalties if you don't follow the ones that are the laws. Okay, so these are all important things to know. How do we maintain compliance? So the thought is, usually the laws or regulations or that other people have discuss controls, and we're going to spend some time talking about what we mean by controls. But you typically need physical controls. You know, are there locks? Are there fences? Are there guards? Are there cameras? For example, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission requires there be cameras inside the nuclear power plant. And actually, what was it? It wasn't even that one. There was I was taking a tour of the Idaho National Lab, and they were showing how they had cameras inside an Iranian nuclear power plant, because they wanted to show that the way they were processing the materials, the fusionable materials, and being handled, that none of it was being siphoned off to create nuclear weapons. And this was part of the treaty that we used to have with them. And so they had cameras every place, and the rules and regulations in that international treaty that put this together made sure that everything was physically viewable. Every place you could have access to nuclear material was visible with a camera. There were no dead spots, and you could watch who did things, and there was all these controls, and the inspectors would go in all time to check them. But when we have even just power plants, there's rules. You have to have a fence around it. You have to a lock on the power substation, etc. So those would be in your rules. Then you have administrative controls. You know, what are your processes for accepting, avoiding, or transferring risk? Because this whole thing boils down to risk. And we have something could go wrong. How do we manage it? Do we mitigate it? Do we control for it? Do we say that's somebody else's responsibility? How do we audit this? And what do we do if there's an incident? How do we respond if we say, hey, somebody did break into our system? Okay. One thing you'll need is an information security policy that deals with these things. And one thing they're going to ask is, when was it put in place? Oh, our audit's tomorrow. Quick, let's get a policy written. That's not good enough. And then you don't stop using it tomorrow, the day after the audit. You use it regularly. And we'll talk about some of that. Then there's what the technologists like to deal with is the technology controls. Firewalls, intrusion detection systems, access control systems, password scanners, encryption, etc. These are the things that, how do we manage this physically? What we typically do is we break this down also into, in your information security policy or your document, your key controls and your compensating controls. A key control, they're your primary ones. They provide a reasonable degree of assurance that the risk is mitigated. You don't say, well, how do we know this is a good password because we spelled the word, we make sure they spell their words backwards. That's not good enough. Or, hey, I use SHA-1. That's not good enough. If a control fails, it's unlike another control will take its place. So we don't have a good, strong defense in depth. That makes it a key control. Failure of the control will affect an entire process. That's a key control. You also have compensating controls. They are used when other controls are impractical or infeasible. And you need a good reason for this, and it has to be explained to the regulators and regulatory people, the auditors, etc. For example, a regulation requires maybe that you run an antivirus scanner on your machine. But if you're in an industrial control system and maybe it's a device that is monitoring the network, but real-time control device built on a small microprocessor, it may not have the ability to run antivirus. So maybe the operating system itself on there can't run the antivirus. So you could say, well, we're using this particular operating system, which is less susceptible to malware, or here's how we limit user access. That is a real-time control device. So we don't have a whole bunch of user accounts on it. Nobody uses email. Nobody browses the web on it. This thing only runs these processes. These are the only services that are running. This is who has access. And so you walk the auditors through your best practices to keep that device secure. That will work. You must, to maintain your compliance, and so when they come in and audit you, you must show that you're monitoring. You must monitor these controls and the data they produce. Imagine you have an intrusion detection system that creates alerts. Nobody's ever looking for the alerts. Or a door alarm that's silenced. So there was a problem years ago at the airfield in Guam, I believe it was. And airplanes were coming in. There was a kind of a mountain range right by there, and there was an accident. The plane hit a mountain. So they put in some controls to protect the plane, and they said, here, what we're going to do is we're going to put a warning, a low altitude warning. So when a plane comes in, if it's too low, an alert will go off. So they had a visible alert on the screen. Well, there weren't many people working one day, and guy had his back to the monitor, filling in some paper. A plane came in and crashed. Okay, or a near miss. I don't remember which. So they said, okay, that's not good enough. We're going to do an audible alert. So they said, because somebody didn't see it, so we're going to strengthen the control. We're going to review. We're doing a review. Did that control work? No. So then they put up a speaker. Well, every time a plane came in for a landing, at some point it got in where it said it was low altitude. So it went beep. It started beeping. And so the people working at the tower got tired of this, so they muted the speaker. They put a bunch of stuff to stuff the speaker, because every time a plane was landing, it was annoying. Investigators came, saw this, said, okay, this is not going to work. And they said, here's what we're going to do. The problem with that plane hitting that mountain. It wasn't even coming in for a landing. It was just on the wrong place. So we'll allow you to say, if anybody's within this certain distance, we know they're coming in for a landing, you can turn off the alarm. So at a certain distance, we turn on the alarm, and then after a bit, we know they're coming in for landing, we turn it off. Then there was another accident, a plane crashed. They went to audit it and found out, well, they had turned on the alarm at 51 nautical miles and turned it off at 50 nautical miles. Now, this was done in a config file. The config file was over 1,000 lines long. The turning it on was on like line 20, and the turning it off was on like line 850. And so somebody auditing it never saw it. This was an example Dr. Conte de Leon used in his PhD dissertation, so that's why I know about it. We have to deal with people. We have to deal with mistakes that people make. You know, you have to be able to monitor the alerts, and that was a safety alert, but same thing happens with security. You must periodically check them, especially, you know, if you're using antivirus software, are you updating your antivirus software? Intrusion detection, are you updating it? If you're using a crypto algorithm, has it been broken recently? Hey, we're using SHA-1. Oh no, SHA-1's no longer good. We're going to use SHA-2, etc. I'm using MD5. MD5 is no longer good. I have to use this other one. I'm using OpenSSH. OpenSSH actually had a big security flaw in it, but that called the Heartbleed vulnerability. But that was because there was an error in the software update. So we have to make sure we update it. What's important in any of these systems is you don't get stuck in what we call analysis paralysis. And by constantly looking and say, oh, that system's not good enough, let's make it better. If I spend all my time constantly analyzing the system and trying to make it better and never implementing any controls, I get stuck. The best thing to do is review and do the best you can, improve it each time, and repeat. Review it. You know, oh, now we've learned something better. Repeat. You know, improve it, repeat. Now, once you've reviewed things, you got to document it. This is the dread of technologists. Computer scientists, cybersecurity people hate writing. Most of them, some love it. Document the results of the review and the changes that are made. This helps you evaluate trends and shows continuous improvement. And the auditing and the regulatory agencies love to see continuous improvement. It shows you're paying attention and you're keeping up to date. Then you need to report what you documented to your leadership, you know, your boss, supervisor, whatever, and beyond, okay? To infinity and beyond. No, just to... once you monitor, review, and document this, like I said, report it to your leadership. The report should follow a standard format that the organization has agreed upon. That makes it easier for them to quickly look at it, understand it, evaluate it, compare it to old things. They don't have to keep figuring out what you meant. This should be a regularly scheduled review. Maybe every 6 months we do a review or whatever the regulatory agency requires. It could be an intermediate step too if there's an urgent issue, like, oh, we found out about a Heartbleed bug. There's a problem in OpenSSH. Here's what we did. We found all our software that used the old OpenSSH software, and we recompiled it and distributed it with the new version, with the patch, etc. You know, we looked at the tools we're using that other people did and found out what versions of what libraries they were using and checked if they were expecting to use or requiring to use the old version, and then we did that. And there's a whole process there for going through these things. And then you hand it off to leadership. Hey, here's how we address this vulnerability. Multiple reasons to do this. One, they know what's going on. Two, you're justifying your paycheck because they know you're doing what you're supposed to be doing. When the auditors and regulators come in, they can see you're doing best practices. And the leadership may actually take your document and include it in the report, probably will, to the regulators or auditors. They'll often look at what is the documentation the company's using. Now, we have to be careful because sometimes you're hit. I was talking to somebody who said he was evaluating a power company. They were following the first round of the NERC regulations. And the NERC regulations insisted that, you know, if your network is connected to the internet, you must have a firewall. So they put in a firewall. Oh, the firewall was slowing things down because it was going through and making all these rule checks. So they deleted all the rules because there was nothing in the regulation that said you have to have rules in the firewall. So I see some head shaking. So it was just, a straight wire. He found that at more than one place. And they said, well, the regulations didn't say anything about rules. He said they implied it. They did put them into the rules later, but he failed them on the audit. He said, this is not best practices. Okay. So let's talk about this a bit further. Now, NIST 853, I don't expect you to read it. It would be fabulous if you did, but it's hundreds of pages. This is something I gave you at the beginning of the semester. It's 463 pages. It's in the supplemental reading document. This is the NIST is the standard. It's security and privacy controls for federal information systems and organizations. It is for unclassified systems in general. So they have a risk management strategy where tier 1 is the organizational level. Tier 2 is specific business processes or mission processes. It's things we need to accomplish certain things. And then tier 3 is the information systems that support that. And so when we deal with strategic risk, you want to deal with risk to the organization via risk to specific mission and business processes via risk to specific information systems. So we have transparency of risk-based decisions comes down. There's organization-wide risk awareness. And then going up, there's a feedback loop for continuous improvement. And there's communication between the management of these different tiers. And that gives us what they call tactical risk. More importantly, what they do is they have this 6-step process. So they have their main description of the mission and business processes. What are we doing? If we're in manufacturing, we've got the design process, we've got the physical manufacturing process, maybe we've got a quality control process. We also have human resources we have to deal with. We have maybe there's things dealing with waste management, all those different processes you deal with. Different reference models. Now, this is for federal systems, but this is a good model for everybody to use. The architectures for the segments and solutions, information system boundaries. What are those boundaries? You don't have to know what all these terms mean. Just know they're here. And then also the laws, directives, policy, and guidance, strategic goals and objectives, information security requirements, priorities, and resource availability. And that all gives you into step 1, where now you can categorize the information system. What type of information system was it doing? Well, there's the Federal Information Processing Systems, FIPS, Standard 199, or NIST Special Publication 860, that another whole document that talks about how you categorize these systems. Then you select the security controls for each system. And I will go into a minute what those are. Again, you can use FIPS 200 or Special Publication 853. That's this one. Then you implement the controls and recommendations for doing that. It's Publication 800-160, another one. Then you assess the controls. How good are they? Are they working? And that's discussed in this document. This one's the 853A. Oh, wait, no, this is 853. So I guess 853A is another one. Then you also authorize the systems in a very industrial control system process, a manufacturing process, or in a military or government system. Somebody has to say, yes, this system is good enough to now use. We've implemented all the controls. In a normal business, maybe that's just the IT people who say, hey, we've set up everything we need, we've designed it, we've put it together, now we can use it. In the government, until it's authorized, you can't turn it on. You can't use it, can't connect it to real data, real systems. Then you monitor the controls, and there's another document about that. The government loves these standards and documents. They're really useful to know. And then you repeat as needed. Okay. CNS, the Committee for, National Security System, something, Instruction 1253, that's another document, provides guidance for this risk management framework, steps 1 and 2, if these are national security systems, so classified systems. All right. So I just talked about all these. So again, categorize them, select them, based on the results of the security categorization, applying tailoring guidance. I will talk about what that means. Implement the controls and document the design, development, implementation details for the controls. So you can say, this is what we plan to do. One thing is when I talk to people who do audits, they say, show us your network diagrams, show us your design document, tell us what your controls are. And then they audit and check. Or you said you're doing this. Is this what you're really doing? Most audits, even financial audits, work the same way. You say, hey, these are our processes for issuing reimbursements to somebody. And this is how we check that those are valid, right? That somebody's not just lying and getting a whole bunch of money reimbursed. And then they check, they audit certain systems randomly. You know, you had 10,000 reimbursements. We're going to audit 50 of them and see if all 50 follow randomly, if they followed the compliance. That's it. University does this all the time with grants. You know, are we following the processes for managing the money for grants? I've had several audited. I have one that always raises flags because they look for certain things, and this one grant is weird. It's not normal. So they audit it every year, and we always have to get them documentation. And they love the fact that we get a call from the grant management office, the Office of Sponsored Programs. They say, the auditors are here now. We need this documentation on this grant. And we can get it to them within a half an hour because we have it readily available. And they know we're not just making it up because we had all that documentation they called for readily available. And it matches the numbers. So we always pass those audits, so that's cool. But documenting is important, and keeping the documentation up to date is important. When you assess the controls, are they implemented correctly? You know, operating as intended. You shouldn't wait for the auditors to do this. You should be doing this yourself. Are they producing the desired outcome with respect to meeting the security requirements? I shouldn't have put this number up here. That's from the standard. Then it's authorized, like I said, based on determination of risk. Does the assessment show that we can manage the risk appropriate to what we're worried about for these particular assets? I don't know if I should. No, I don't think I shared this with you. I may have. So I was involved in a conversation. I was more of a fly on the wall with this, where there's somebody from the FAA talking to somebody from the NSA. Did I talk about this before? No. So the FAA, Federal Aviation Administration, and the guy was talking about the RTCA controls they do, DO 178B, which is used for certifying software on flight-worthy software. Basically software that if the software failed, the plane, there's no guaranteed continued safe flight or landing. Basically, planes are going to crash, people are going to die if the software fails. How do they assess that? So they assess it, and they actually, in all their controls, put in an estimate of failure. You know, what's the mean time before failure? How many millions of hours of flight time before you get an error? You know, and it's, you know, like 1 million hours of flight time before you get an error. So 10 to the minus 6 probability of an error. And the FAA was saying, this is fabulous. The US government should use it. And the guy from the NSA is saying, no, it's not good enough. And he says, well, you know, this is a safety standard. If one of these fails, a plane crashes and 300 people die, plus anybody on the ground. That's an awful tragedy. And the guy from the National Security Agency was saying, yeah, I'm talking about protecting nuclear weapon systems. If one of those fails, 3 million people die. You know, a terrorist gets a nuclear bomb and sets it off in New York City. No, your system isn't good enough. And they were going back and forth until the NSA guy finally said those numbers and the FAA guy shut up. So it was interesting being, like I said, the fly on the wall for that conversation. So when the NSA guy was talking about authorizing systems, he was trying to find a better way to authorize cybersecurity systems. And they were looking at, you know, safety system, what the Nuclear Regulatory Commission does, what the FAA does, because what the banking industry does, and then going from there. Last, you have to monitor. You know, if we're monitoring the information system, the environment of operation on an ongoing basis, you know, are the controls still effective? Maybe a control found a vulnerability or a problem in it. Maybe there was a change in legislation or executive orders or other directives, policies, regulations, standards. Any of those changes, we have to go back and reassess. Plus, or maybe we change things in our systems. Okay, so when I'm talking about controls, what am I talking about? NIST has these multiple, what they call families of controls in the 853 document. So they have access control family, and they use these two-letter acronyms for them because the government loves its acronyms. Awareness and training, audit and accountability, security assessment and authorization, configuration management, contingency planning, identification authentication, incident response, maintenance, media protection. So this is how you protect stuff stored on hard drive, backup tapes, etc. Physical and environmental protection. So there's the physical controls. Planning, that starts you getting your administration along with training. Personnel security. How do you know you're doing what you need to do with the people? Let's see. Risk assessment, system and service acquisition, system and communication protection. This is where cryptography fits in. System and information integrity, and program management. So in the NIST standard, what they do is in Appendix D of this standard, they talk about different security control baselines. So they say your system is going to have initial control baselines, either going to be low, moderate, or high. What level of risk is there if this system is compromised is really what this deals with. Then for each of the controls, you have the control number, AC1, AC2, AC3. So AC1 is access control policies and procedures. AC2 is account management. On down, AC7 is unsuccessful login attempts. Then there's a priority. So all the P1s those are the controls you implement first. Then you go to the secondary controls. Then you go to the third level, P3 controls, and then to the ones that are P0 that are no specific level. Now notice here, these three are not selected. AC4, 5, and 6 are not selected for the low system. You don't need to implement these controls in a federal information processing system that's dealing as a low baseline. If you notice here, like an account management, AC2 is listed for low. For moderate, it's AC2, and then in parentheses 1, 2, 3, 4. Well, these are extensions to AC2, additional things you need to do beyond the AC2 baseline. And then high adds 11, 12, and 13. So they've gone through and put in all these rules and regulations of how you do these. Okay, so what do these look like? I want to look at AC7 here at first. Unsuccessful logon attempts. So this is from Appendix F. All the controls are listed in Appendix F of this document. The information system must enforce a limit of, and then there's this thing in square brackets and italics. What they say you must do is you cut and paste this control document, you put it into your information security policy document, and you replace anything that has an assignment with what is appropriate for your organization. So maybe we defined 5. We have 5 consecutive invalid login attempts by a user during a what time period? Maybe 24 hours? And we automatically, so it's automatically, can't be manually, not user intervention, we select something. We either lock the account for something, again, a time period, like lock it for 24 hours, lock it for an hour, or lock the account until released by an administrator, or delay the next login prompt according to some delay algorithm. So maybe the first 3 attempts, you're fine. The next one takes an extra 10 minutes. You have to wait 10 minutes, then 20 minutes, then 40 minutes, then an hour. And again, these things are selected and chosen when the maximum number of unsuccessful attempts is exceeded. So they go through and they say, these are all the things you have to choose. They have some supplemental guidance here. They say this control applies regardless of whether login occurs via local or network connection. So just informing people. Due to the potential for denial of service, a network connection shutting out an authorized user because somebody's trying to break into their account, automatic lockouts initiated by this are usually temporary. and automatically released after a predetermined time period. So that's a hint for people designing these things. Hey, don't lock them out forever. You lock them out for 24 hours, 1 hour, whatever the number needs to be. If a delay algorithm is selected, they may choose to employ different algorithms for different types of different components in the system based on the capabilities of those components. Responsive to unsuccessful login attempts may be implemented both operating system level and per application. Okay, I've logged into the system, but now I want to get access to Office 365 and I need to do something else. I need to get access to Vandal Web. That's something else. And then it mentions controls that are related to this because they work together. Then there are some enhancements that are possible, not required for this. So enhancement 1, and this is typical of standards. Notice it says withdrawn. This is under the old version. This was a separate saying, it's an unsuccessful login attempt or automatic account lock. What we would do with it, now that's thrown up into higher level. It's actually in the text of the control. So that enhancement no longer counts as a separate enhancement. This one does. Could we purge or wipe a mobile device? So this is what organization defined mobile devices we have based on these, what does an organization, how does it define purging or wiping? What are the requirements? What are the techniques? So if I have a cell phone that's loaned to me by the company that I'm using for company work and it gets lost, how do they wipe everything that's on it? And after so many consecutive unsuccessful device login attempts. 10 attempts, my device bricked. No way I can get in. Everything's locked off. What do they do? This is only mobile devices, but it's a separate control that if your organization uses mobile devices, you need this. If you don't do this enhancement. So like the supplemental guidance for this, only the mobile devices for which a login occurs, personal digital assistants, smartphones, tablets. The login is to the mobile device, not to any one account on the device, not to the network from the device. So successful logins to any accounts on the mobile device reset the unsuccessful login count to 0. Organizations define information to be purged or wiped carefully in order to avoid wiping too much stuff. We're not going to wipe the whole operating system. Maybe we'll wipe your email. So as a faculty member, I have access to the University of Idaho's Office 365 on my phone for email. I had to agree there's a purging policy. One, it deletes emails after a certain amount of time, so there's not too many on my phone that could have been from you guys because they're FERPA protected. 2, they have a policy if my phone's lost, I call them and any U of I connected stuff is wiped from the phone by the application. Office 365 will get a signal and wipe it. May be unnecessary if you have strong encryption. And my device is encrypted. When you power it on, it has to decrypt things, so that helps too. That's another requirement they had. And again, some related controls. And last thing when we see this standard is, it is priority 2, as I mentioned. Again, here's what we have: low, moderate, high. So in Appendix F, it shows all these things. Let me actually go to another one. I'm going to go to this. Let's see if I can find this on my share screen. So this is harder to see, I know. This is access control 1. Okay, that the organization will have access control policies and procedures, will develop documents and disseminate them to whoever needs them in the organization. The access control policy that will address purpose, scope, roles, responsibilities, management commitment, coordination among organizational entities, compliance, and let's see. I just lost it. Procedures to facilitate the implementation of the policy, and reviews and updates the current access control policy and procedures. And we would say every 6 months, once a year, whatever the frequency is. And addresses establishment of the policy for effective implementation of security controls in the AC family. This is used by everything else in the AC family. And it reflects applicable laws, federal orders, directives, regulations, etc. Again, this is required by all. It's priority 1. Here's the interesting one, account management. The control says the organization will identify and select the following types of information system accounts to support organizational mission and business functions. And then you list them down. Oh, so we have a system administrator account. We have the root account. We have this, the faculty account, the student accounts. So we're going to list, and there may be a long list here. We assign the system assigns account managers for the system. Who belongs to which group and role memberships? Who has what type of account? Who are the authorized users of the system? The group and role membership again, and access authorizations, privileges, and other attributes required for each account. So all should be documented in the system. Who approves requests to create a new account? Who creates, enables, modifies the accounts according with the approvals? Who monitors? Yeah, and then we monitor the use of the accounts. There's pages of this stuff. The organization notifies account managers when the accounts are no longer required, when users are terminated or transferred, and when individual information system usage or need to know changes. How it's authorized, valid access authorization, intended system usage, other attributes. Review accounts for compliance with account management requirements. Again, frequency, every 6 months, every month, daily, whatever. And how do we reissue shared group account credentials? And a whole lot of supplemental information I'm not going to go into here. Whole lot of related controls. The enhancements are what I find interesting. I'm going to make this a little bigger. So the account management enhancement says the system will employ automated mechanisms to support the management of the accounts. Now, this is for moderate systems. Now, automated may include, for example, using email or text messages to automatically notify account managers when users are terminated or transferred. That's sufficient in this case. Using a system to monitor account usage. Using phone notification, report atypical system account usage. Usually that's an automated phone warning. Removal of temporary emergency accounts. So removes or disables temporary emergency accounts after some specified time. Automatically disables inactive accounts after a specified amount of time. Automatically audits account creation, modification, enabling, disabling, removal, and notifies who of these things. And there's some auditing controls, AU for auditing, that relates to this. In highlighted here is a control that is required now if you're at a high-level system. When a user logs out, organization requires users log out when something, a certain time period of expected inactivity or description of when to log out. Now that becomes an interesting one I'll come back to in a second. I'll skip over these. These other 3 are required for high-level systems too. The system enforces a certain circumstance or use conditions for this. Basically, what conditions or circumstances on which information system accounts can be used. So, and this is where we have certain days of the week, time of day, specific durations of time, those types of things that we've seen when we were looking at the attribute-based access control. We'll monitor the counts for some type of typical usage. That'll be defined. Reports the atypical usage to whoever. Again, that's defined. Maybe we're accessing the information system at certain times of day or from locations not consistent with normal usage. Not that they're disallowed, but they're considered atypical. And disabled accounts of users posing significant risk within a certain time period of discovery of the risk. So those are all the high-level systems. I want to get back to, okay, wait, which one was it? I said I'll get back to. That was back number 5, wasn't it? Let me double check. log out. So there was a national bureau in England that was enforcing a logout policy that if you had a certain amount of delayed time, you had to log back into your system. It locked the screen. And this was a system where people did a lot of paperwork, where they would read and figure things out and then type something into the computer. Well, they decided they'd be proactive on security and keep the logout really short, under 5, I think it was 5 minutes. So 5 minutes inactivity, you had to type it in. And they had really complex, long passwords to keep the thing secure. Well, the workers were tired of this. They were spending more time logging back into the system than they were doing their work. So they found if you bought a mouse jiggler, a little device you can put your mouse on that jiggles the mouse, it would show as activity. Or one of them had, those drinking birds that tip and drink. It would tap the mouse, and that would be sufficient to show activity. So it kept them logged in. Then they'd get up and go for break, and their computer would still be logged in. So somebody I knew went and did an audit of this place and saw this and said, okay, assessing and monitoring your controls, they are not working. The controls were so overbearing that the users decided to bypass them. It was interesting, that same organization, so proud of their security, had took pictures of people in the offices, and as they were sent out this brochure, on the whiteboard behind one of the people was the main account user ID and password that went on this brochure out to everybody. So the training wasn't quite there yet. That was a funny one. Criminal activity. Cybercrime is defined as criminal activity in which computers or computer networks are a tool, a target, or a place of criminal activity. So what do I mean by that? I mean, it could be that your computer is attacked, and I think I mentioned this back in chapter 1 stuff. Your computer is attacked. You're broken into. You have a website. You're a company. Somebody's broken in and stolen data, or your network. So that's the target part. The attacker's attacking somebody. Could be using a computer network to do the attack. They could be not even doing a cyber attack. They could just be committing some type of crime using a computer. They could be keeping track of the records of their money laundering operation. They could be, there we go. That's an even better version of the slides. So, and it's all categorized based on the computer's role. Is it a target, a storage device of information about the crime, or is it a communication tool for communicate with other people? Or actually, as I should put this in there, used as the weapon. Yeah. And there's a lot of different things that store and keep track of actually what these categories are. There's cybercrime convention, there's computer crime surveys. Just know that they're out there. There are some challenges faced by law enforcement and just organizations when it comes to cybercrime. I know you probably can't read all these, so I'll go into them. So this first circle is the characteristics of the law enforcement agency, and problems that law enforcement agencies face. There's a failure to catch up with cybercrime technologies. The law enforcement agencies are going to be behind what the criminals are doing. They may be inexperienced with cybercrime. I remember back in 1993, or was it 4? It was 1994. I had gone out to NASA to do an internship, and they had a security breach the year before. And basically, one of 5 cybercrime experts at the FBI had to fly out from Washington, D.C. to this NASA base in California to do the investigation. Because most of what the FBI was doing back in the 90s had nothing to do with cybercrime. Now, they do more of that now, but still a lot of what they're trained on, they're not computer people. They're law enforcement people. They may just be unable to solve the crime, even if they know something about it, because you got to find the perpetrator. Industry may not collaborate very well with them, so that could be an issue or a concern if the crime occurred in industry. And also just collaboration with global cooperation, because the criminals don't have to be physically at the location like they do in other crimes. Now, if we look here over at on the left-hand side at the bottom, the cybercrime victims, they don't have a lot of confidence with law enforcement agencies. So again, I'm talking about companies now. If they don't believe the law enforcement agency will do the right job, will they even report to them? They may have their own weak defense mechanisms. There may be low reporting rates where they don't report very frequently or often what is actually going on because they're embarrassed or they're afraid it hurt their stock prices, or even there's legal liability for them. And they may comply with cybercriminal demands. Hey, I want my company back up and running. I'll pay the ransomware. I'll pay what I need to pay to get things going. So those are all problems that we face in the modern world of cybercrime. The cybercriminals, it's globalized. They are everywhere. There is a town in, I can't remember, some small European country where the major source of income is cybercrime. People are doing bank fraud, they're doing other things. There's just a group of people and it's the major income. Same type of thing we've seen before with organized crime throughout the world in the past. They have increased success and confidence because of these left-hand side problems, the problems we're seeing with the weak defense mechanism, the low reporting rates, lack of confidence, gives them increased success. More sophisticated technology definitely links with organized crime because, hey, it's a way to make money. And if there's a way to make money, they're going to do it. And they have expertise and experience, unique profiles. What's interesting is there's certain types of attacks we will see as we're monitoring what goes on. And you could say, oh, that's the group from, I'm going to pick a country in Yugoslavia. It's not Yugoslavia, but somewhere like that. Because the attack started 8 o'clock around their time and end at 5 o'clock their time. And we'll see the same thing with, oh, these attacks are coming from China because they're normal workday attacks. These are coming from the United States or North America. It's interesting, but people actually see these. And we also see, for example, the more nuisance type of attacks at the beginning of a school year, when students show up on campus and they feel more anonymous and start browsing and attacking computer systems. So anyway, these are things we just have to look at and deal with in terms of what's going on in the world. Let's see now. Come on, clear that. There we go. Little thing I wanted to talk, just wrap your mind around. There's this thing called intellectual property. And this is something, the reason I'm bringing these up now is they're going to come up into the next chapter 7 material we're talking about, also comes up in laws. So what is intellectual property? Intellectual property is basically something I have created or a company has, and it has value. And it has value because it is something that we use for our company to be successful, our product to be successful. If I wrote a book, that's my intellectual property. That's my creative thing. I create a movie, write a song. That's intellectual property. Invent a new algorithm, invent a new, better mousetrap. Invent, write some new software. All that is intellectual property. How we protect intellectual property is 3 ways. There's patents. Let's see. Which is supposed to protect you against unauthorized selling, making, or using of something. We'll get to this in the next slides. There's trademarks, and there's copyrights. So a copyright protects a tangible or fixed expression of an idea, but not the idea itself. And it's automatically assigned when created. Didn't used to be automatic, but it's now automatic. but it may still need to be registered in some countries. Copyrights exist when the proposed work is original. You've put an original idea into a concrete form. So I put an idea on paper, wrote a book, that's copyrightable. Wrote a paper, copyrightable. Put together a movie, that's copyrightable. Song, that's copyrightable. So literary works, musical works, dramatic works, pantomimes even, choreographed work, pictorial, graphic, and sculpture, motion pictures, other audiovisual works, sound recordings, architectural works, software related works. Now this is a one the community has been struggling with. I have an idea of how to solve a problem. I put it in writing in terms of a piece of code. Is that copyrightable? Right? Is that a tangible thing? And so that's something people look at. And there's a lot of interesting things when it comes to copyrights. Copyrights do expire. Shakespeare's stuff's not copyrighted anymore, and anybody can use it. But stuff that J.K. Rowling's works on Harry Potter, that's all copyrighted because it's more recent. And you have protections from somebody reusing your copyrighted work. In terms of what we're talking about, computer systems, computer security, if somebody can steal that copyrighted work and use it, especially maybe before you've released it while you're creating it and they say it's their own, that's intellectual property theft. If they steal your software, same thing. So these are things we want to protect ourselves against, those types of attacks or just call them attacks. So the copyright owner has these exclusive rights. Reproduction right. They are the one allowed to reproduce the copyright work or authorize people to reproduce that copyrightable work. To modify it. So I can take the written work I've done and make a change to it, to distribute it, or public performance, play the music, public display if it's a sculpture or artwork. I have controls over that if I'm the copyright owner. I don't want somebody to do these things or take these things from me. All right, so those are things we have with copyrights. Now, it could be, the NFL always says, broadcasts of the football games are copyrighted. That's their expression of an idea, their thing that they've created and released it. You can watch it on TV. That's their distribution rights. They have sold the rights to the network to display the games, but you don't have a right to reproduce it. Right? Patents are a little more explicit. They give rights to an inventor of something, excluding others from making, using, or offering for sale or selling an invention. And the using is an interesting one a lot of people don't understand. So let's say I created a brand new way of investing in the stock market, and I got a patent for it. You cannot also use my technique for investing in the stock market because I patented it. Even if you're not selling it to someone else. And we've actually heard of people where somebody invents something, like let's go back historical. Alexander Graham Bell invented the telephone. Nobody else can make a telephone now, even if they understood exactly what they did, even if they were inventing it completely by themselves, but the same way. They had the same idea and they did it because he had the patent first, he wins. And actually, apparently with Alexander Graham Bell, he beat somebody to the patent office by a couple of hours or days. So these really matter. The important things with, let's see, the types of patents, there are utility patents, design patents, and plant patents. Now, utility patent is basically anything new, useful process, machine, artifact, article of manufacture, or composition of matter. So I've created a new product. A design is a new original ornamental design for an article of manufacture. But these have to be non-obvious. I will never get a patent for putting a square handle on a coffee mug, even though traditionally coffee mugs more have rounded handles. That's somebody who is skilled in the art would think of that. What you patent is things somebody skilled in the art would not think of. And then there's plant patents where it's actually new plants you've grown, a new type of corn, a new type of wheat. An example we look at is the RSA algorithm. The public key algorithm was patented, which means nobody else could use it unless they paid the inventors money to use their algorithm to do public key cryptography, which prevented a lot of people from doing it, basically. And there's some good discussions in the chat on copyright law and stuff I'm not going to go into. A lot of these seem to be right, like fan fiction and stuff. Parodies are protected. Doing something as a farce. You have to be careful when somebody copyrights something. Like, it's not the idea itself that's copyrighted, right? So going back to copyright. So the expression of things about Harry Potter are copyrighted. The name Harry Potter, Hermione Granger, Ron Weasley, Hogwarts, all of those are trademarked or copyrighted. But the world of Harry Potter, the magical world of wizards and muggles, that's an idea. And that's not necessarily copyrightable. So you can do fan fiction in those. There's a lot of gray area. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not an expert. But these are things we want to protect. Now, sometimes somebody creates something that is very innovative, but they don't want to patent it. That's called a trade secret. And what they do is they keep secret what they've invented. They don't publish it. They don't share it with anyone. But there's no patent. And part of the reason, because they're afraid if somebody sees a patent, they can modify it enough to make it not a violation of the patent and still come up with the solution. Now, with patents, you got to be careful. If I do a public pronouncement, I write a paper, I go to a trade show and show my new invented thing. Once it's made public, I can't patent it. Now, it used to be you had a year. And some places they still say you have a year. Like if I wrote a paper, then the university said, you just published that, but we want to patent that algorithm you just described, that new process, that new crypto key. There was a limited time you can do that. And laws keep changing a little. And that's one reason they sometimes say, well, it'll be a trade secret. Okay, trademark is a word, name, symbol, or device that's used in trade with your goods. The name McDonald's as a restaurant is a trademark. iPad is a trademark. It indicates the source of the goods. It's supposed to distinguish them from goods of others. Now, what's interesting, when Apple computers came out, they trademarked Apple. There is an Apple recording company. But Apple Computers was about computers, not about music. And so there was no trademark problems. Once the iPod started coming out and they started doing, the iTunes store and all this other stuff, then there was a fight because now they were doing music and making music related. And Apple music company, production company was also doing music. And so there became a trademark dispute. But if you don't trademark something, you're out. There was somebody who had McDonald's restaurant. It was William McDonald, and he had a small restaurant. And when McDonald's, the chain, grew big enough, they went and shut down every store with the name McDonald's on it that sold food, because they own the trademark. So you use these trademarks to prevent others from using a confusingly similar mark, but not to prevent others from making the same goods or from selling the same goods or services under clearly different marks. So, McDonald's restaurant has a trademark. Burger King has a trademark. They both can sell hamburgers and French fries. Now, granted, they've also done copy or patents or whatever on, I think McDonald's has a patent and Burger King have patents on the way they're doing hamburgers. So McDonald's is the 2 all beef patty, special sauce, lettuce, cheese, pickles, onions on a sesame seed bun, etc. And somebody else can't do exactly that. Okay. With respect to computer security, as I was saying, our software programs are protected by copyrights, perhaps by patent if they're an implementation of a specific idea. The law keeps changing on this. They went way one way and started giving way too many patents. And then it started going the other way. The idea of double clicking was patented. So nobody else could double click on something. You could single click, but you couldn't double click. Became an issue, especially since Palo Alto Research Center in Menlo Park, California, basically they invented the computer mouse. They invented windowing technology back in the 70s. And the idea of clicking and all this was invented and made publicly available. And then somebody much later tried to patent it. I've been hired as a consultant on many patents. I read things and say, yeah, that's obvious to somebody in the state art. And here's examples of papers people have published that talked about doing exactly what these people tried to patent. Database content, the arrangement of database is copyright protected. Digital content, audios, videos, all that is protected. Your algorithms, your processes, that's what people usually protect with a patent. Or they'll keep things trade secrets. So these are just things to think about. All of these things are, this intellectual property is important to keep protected in a computer system. The laws that tie to it, Digital Millennium Copyright Act of 1998, implemented basically worldwide treaties on intellectual property, encouraged copyright owners to use technology to protect their copyrighted materials, including measures to prevent access to the work or prevent copying the work, and prohibited attempts to bypass the measures. Even if it was a really weak measure, there could be criminal or civil penalties for bypassing the measure. So one example I remember was it? I think it was Sun. Sun had a protection mechanism on the disk, and how and this is a small aside, but how DVDs work or CDs work on a computer is the outermost track the computer starts reading that. If it reads the right data on there, it says, oh, this is a computer disk, and it may execute programs or whatever's on there. If it doesn't recognize any of that, it says, oh, it's a data disk, it's a music disk or whatever, and it plays it. So one person found the protection mechanism with the outer disk. All they did is used a Sharpie and drew a black line on the outside of the disk, and now it became I guess this was a video, became a video disk, and now it had no software protection on it, so they can copy it onto their computer. And that was a violation of the Digital Millennium Copyright Act because they bypassed the protective mechanisms. And so just because they could do something, bypass the mechanism, doesn't mean they should. Doesn't mean they were permitted to. All right. The fair use in Digital Millennium Copyright Act is kind of what was showing up in the chat. I'm allowed to take a small amount of work and copy it for fair use. I can also take something like, if I bought a musical disc, I can back it up and make a copy of it. A movie, I can back it up and make a copy of it, protect my investment. That's fair use. I can't make a copy and then give it away to people or sell it to people. That's not fair use. Reverse engineering, this has gone back and forth over the history, but basically, can I look at a piece of software and reverse engineer it, figure out what it was written as? Right now, yes, we can. But what are the intent of doing that? I have to be careful because now I'm looking at their software, and if their software is copyrighted, there may be restrictions on what I use with that software. But if I'm doing research, especially encryption research, security testing, all of those things is usually exempted. Personal privacy things are protected. There are concern that legitimate security crypto research may be restricted. More related to this is export control laws, where I may not be able to teach a student about it if they would take it to another country. We're not going to go into those details, but they're there. So how this is usually managed with a digital rights management system. And so again, we're thinking about how we implement security. So DRM is the system and procedures for ensuring the digital rights holder is clearly identified and receives stipulated payment for their work, so they got paid for it, may impose further restrictions on their work, their use. So like at a book, a non-digital thing, you look at the beginning of the book and there's the copyright page with all the information about who owns the copyright and everything. Books that come from libraries that were for sale and no longer for sale and were discarded, they rip out those pages. They're supposed to destroy the books too, but they don't always do that. So the whole idea of a digital rights management is electronically, how do we enforce these? There's no single standard, no single architecture. The goal often is to provide mechanisms for the complete content management lifecycle, like iTunes, like any subscription service where you subscribe to it. Now you have access to the content, viewing it through that service's applications or tools. Persistent content protection. That's the goal. Kind of looks like something like this, where we have the content provider, the person who makes the stuff. They provide it to a clearinghouse, a central repository place, which the clearinghouse is responsible for managing the funding. So the consumer wants to get access to something, they contact the clearinghouse. So Amazon, iTunes, whatever, they get a license to the stuff after paying for it. The clearinghouse informs the distributor what's available. Content providers made the content available to the distributor, and this is an example mechanism. And that protected content can now be sent to the consumer. So basically, the idea with this mechanism is you pay, clearinghouse sells, distributor, okay, send the licensed material over to the customer. And it pays the royalty fees to the content provider. A lot of different mechanisms for this through the app stores, through iTunes, etc. Amazon, all of these things now exist. Lots of different mechanisms, but the concept is the same. You have a content provider, you have a customer, you have something in between that deals with distribution and control and dissemination of the information once the person's paid. It may be something like we have, this is a more complex thing, but we have a service interface. So customers, service providers, and right holders communicate, web-based is often the way this is done now, through the service interface, which then connects to the back end, the systems, with identity management. Who is this person? Is it a customer? Is it is it a right holder? Got that. We'll have ways of managing the content, adding, deleting, updating content, retrieving content. The rights management, what can I do? If I'm not a right, can a customer overwrite your book? No. And then the system provides security, authentication, authorization, encryption, billing, and delivery. And then all that is sent off to the devices. Now, it may also be going back up through the service interface to the devices, or there may be a separate device interface for accessing this stuff. All depends on the architectures. But again, just gives you an idea, this is what's there. So we have a system architecture with an interface for the different types of users of the system and control of the digital materials. Okay. Oops, thought I got rid of that. Okay, so that's intellectual property. Sarbanes-Oxley, I talked about that earlier. This is to protect investors by improving accuracy and reliability of corporate disclosure. We had an example in, what was it? WorldCom and also Enron, big examples. Them lying about the books. In Enron, actually, the CEO was also responsible for managing, creating the reports that he signed off on and said were correct, and they were lying about how much money they were making so they get more money from investors. And this was all to take care of this. So Section 302 of Sarbanes-Oxley states the chief executive officer of a company and the chief financial officer must personally certify that the reports are accurate and complete. They must assess and report on the effectiveness of internal controls and financial reporting. How do we make sure our financial records were accurate? The integrity of the data is now what we're talking about. Where you could think of the first part is more, confidentiality. This puts highest level of responsibility at the top of a company. So you can't take the low-level accountant and throw them under the bus and say, oh, they made a mistake, they're fired, and I still hold my job as CEO and all the stock options. They now face potential for criminal fraud liability. But it doesn't miss which internal controls must be assessed. That's left up to the individual companies. There's now a requirement, actually, that they also have somebody with knowledge of cybersecurity on the board of directors. Section 404 states corporation must assess the effectiveness of internal controls and report assessment annually to the Security Exchange Commission. Assessment must be reviewed and judged by an outside auditing firm. It's substantial that large amount of resources are needed for compliance. But it is good practices and what they should have been doing anyway. A comprehensive review of all internal controls related to financial reporting is an extensive task. I know the university goes through this. It has been awkward. We do these internal audits first, then we hire an external auditing firm to audit what the auditors did and audit what we did. And then whoever's funding us, the funding agencies, et cetera, the state will also come in and do audits. Again, to check, are we assessing our controls? Now, we don't have a CEO, but we have the university president. It's broad, does not provide specific guidance on what controls must be assessed, but the auditing firms have basically worked out an idea with each company. These are the things we are worried about. Okay, so those are just some of the things. Those audit controls, are they things that technology people have put in place? Is it encryption? Is it access control? You know, what is keeping somebody from cooking the books? What is keeping me from breaking into the accounting records and transferring money to my private account? Changing the amount. Said, oh, you know, we said we paid $1.4 billion or $1.4 million, let's say, for all these supplies. I'll put in 1.5 million and I'll pocket the extra 100,000. Right? The money's gone from the bank. It evens out on the account. We said we paid him 1.5 million and it's there, but I could have lied. And how did I show who has authority to break into the system? This is where things like not dual factor authentication, but separation of concerns comes into play. Things like the I'm drawing a blank on it now. BIBA integrity model and policy come into play. Who can make these changes? Who can update the systems? So just thinking about these, that's all you need to know about this. Now, privacy, kind of back to confidentiality, definitely overlaps with computer security. Privacy, there's a dramatic increase in the scale of information currently collected and stored over the last decade or so. That information is stored as motivated by law enforcement needs, national security needs, economic incentives. And customers and people want to be aware, need to be aware what's being done with what they're doing. What data about me is being used by companies? How is that being shared? And so there's been several different things that have gone out. In 1998, the European Union Data Protective Directive was adopted for fundamental privacy rights. This has now been superseded by the General Data Protection Regulation. Okay. It did prevent member states from restricting free flow of personal information within the European Union. It was organized around the ideas of consent, consistency, access, security. But what I want to talk about really is the GDPR. When you now go to a website, things will pop up saying, hey, Do you want to enable cookies? We use these cookies to do this and that. That's all because of GDPR. Okay. Why? Because we're in the United States and that's part of a European Union thing. Well, I go next page. I've got some links on these slides I'll share, so much more detail about this here and some other articles. If your company processes data of a European Union citizen or resident, or you offer goods or services to those people, it applies to you even if you're not in the European Union. So a US company selling services, they have to abide by this. Basically, anybody who's on the internet selling services or processing data with anybody, if those people possibly a European Union citizen, even if they're European Union citizen living in the US or a resident, a US citizen living in the EU, they're all covered. So basically all companies now had to do this. The fines for violating this are quite high. 2 tiers of penalties, which max out at 20 million euros, or 4%, or 4% of your company's global revenue, whichever is higher. Plus, data subjects have the right to seek compensation for personal damages. So, lots of definitions here, and this is probably all I'll be able to get a chance to go through today, the GDPR. Personal data. Any information relates to an individual who can be directly or indirectly identified through that information. Names, email addresses are obvious. But location information, ethnicity, gender, biometric data, religious beliefs, web cookies, political opinions could also be considered personal data. Pseudonymous data can also fall under definitions, really ID somebody. So I may log into system and say, hey, I'm Jim AF. Well, people know Jim AF is Jim Alsfoss. So that's my pseudonym, Dr. Awesome could be a pseudonym. It doesn't matter if they can relate it back to me. It's personal. Data processing, by their definitions, any action performed on data, whether automated or manual. They include collecting, recording, organizing, structuring, storing, using, erasing, basically anything dealing with data. A data subject is a person whose data is being processed. Customers, site visitors. A data controller is the person who decides why and how personal data will be processed. If you're an owner or an employee in your organization that handles data, it's you. If you process data, you are a controller. Data processor is a third party that processes personal data on behalf of a data controller. It has special rules for these individuals and organizations. It could be cloud servers, email services, etc. It has specific rules about these. It used to be, I don't know how much they do this now, your doctor, when they were going to a visit, I know my doctor used to do this, he'd go back into his office after meeting with me, pull out his tape recorder and dictate his readings. Somebody would type that in. Not necessarily in my doctor's office, but I know a lot of places, these recordings would be sent to individuals around the world whose job was to be a medical transcriptionist and type in your personal medical stuff into a record. And there was no protections about those. GDPR says now you have those protections. All right, the principles. Processing must be lawful, fair, and transparent to the data subject. Data must be processed for a legitimate reason, specified explicitly to the data subject when you collect it. I'm collecting this data for this reason, and this is how I'm going to use it. You collect and process only as much data as necessary. Keep personal data accurate and up to date. Store personally identifiable data only as long as necessary for a specific purpose. If I'm collecting it for a survey or whatever else I'm doing, and once I'm done, I delete it. Processing done in a way to ensure appropriate security, integrity, and confidentiality, like using encryption. And the data controller is the person responsible for being able to demonstrate compliance with all those principles. Now, I'll come to that in a minute. So it says the accountability, data controllers have to demonstrate. And it's not something you could do after the fact. If you think you're compliant but can't show how, then you're not compliant. Okay. Now, ways they talk about doing it, you can designate the data responsibilities to your team. Maintain detailed documentation of data you're collecting, how it's used, where it's stored, which employee is responsible for it, etc. Train the staff, implement technical and organizational security measures, document all of this, show that you've done the training, show that you've implemented the encryption mechanisms, and that you audit them and check that they're being used. Have data processing agreement contracts in place with any third parties that process data for you. I mean, I talked to one person who was a chief information officer for an online web company, and they had contracts with 12 different companies to process buying and selling things on their website, because each company did different things. One was for shipping, one was for packaging, one was for just customer analytics, one was for credit card processing, etc. And so they had to have these contracts in place for all of them. Should appoint a data protection officer. Not all organizations need one. And there's a link to an article that gives more details. For data security, you're required to handle data securely by implementing appropriate technical and organizational measures. Two-factor authentication, end-to-end encryption, staff training, data privacy policy, limiting access to personal data to only those who need it. And if you have a data breach, you have 72 hours to tell the subjects or face penalties. You've got 3 days to tell your customers, hey, your data got stolen. Maybe ways to use technological safeguards such as encryption to make the data useless to attackers. So yeah, they stole our data, but it was all encrypted. I had data on a backup disk that was going into storage somewhere, and it was encrypted. It's if the data can be released. Remember one of those questions from, I think, chapter 1. Everything security, data encryption is designed by default. By design and by default, you consider data protection. You consider how the principles in the design of any new product or activity, how security is affected, how privacy is effective. If you create a new app, you think about what personal data the app possibly collects. How do you minimize the amount of data that you collect, how it's stored, how it's used, and this has to be documented. They are going to look especially if there's a breach. Oh, your app was attacked. What did you do? Did you have good protections? Article 6 in it lists the instances in which it's legal to process personal data. Don't even think about touching someone's personal data. Don't collect it. Don't store it. Don't sell it to advertisers unless you can justify it with one of these. They gave unambiguous consent to process the data. They opted in, for example, to your email marketing list if that's what you did. Processing is necessary to execute or prepare to enter into a contract with someone. Have to do background check on leasing. You have to collect financial information from them to pay for something. You need to process it to comply with legal obligation, like receive a court order to process their data. You need to process the data to save someone's life. You probably know when that one applies. We won't go to that one. It's necessary to perform a task in the public interest, like your private garbage collection company. So you need the information in terms of who are your customers, where you pick up, are they paying for the data, etc. You have a legitimate interest to process it. The fundamental rights and freedoms of the data subject always override your interest, especially if it's child data. But it is kind of flexible. And the United Kingdom Information Commission's Office provides some examples of that one. Once you've determined lawful basis data processing, you need to document the basis, notify the subject transparently in a simple, easy to read, short, not full of legalese user agreement, and decide later to change your justification. You need to have a good reason, document the reason, and again, notify the subject, allow them to opt in for it. Strict new rules, what constitutes consent. Freely given, specific, informed, and unambiguous. And when those things pop up about cookies, how many of you go and actually read everything that shows up? Must be clearly distinguishable from other matters, presented in clear and plain language. Data subject should be able to withdraw previous consent. Hey, I gave consent to use this website and have cookies. Now I don't want to. Can't simply change legal basis. Children under 13 can only give consent with permission of an adult. their parent, and you need to keep documentary evidence of the consent. They clicked on this consent link at this time. What I find annoying with a lot of web things is they say you consent, if you want to use my website, you have to consent to all these things. You can say no, but then we're not going to give you access, versus, well, these are the only things we really need from you. We don't need all these others. GDPR is supposed to make sure they don't collect things they don't need, even if you gave consent. Now, like I said, not everybody needed a data protection officer. 3 conditions where you are required to appoint one. You're a public authority, other than a court, acting in a judicial capacity. Your core activities require you to monitor people systematically and regularly on a large scale. Google. Your core activities are large-scale processing of special categories of data, and data-related criminal convictions, offenses. Your medical office, that's a large category of data. Okay. If you're a data controller and or a data processor, and as a user of the internet, you're also a data subject. It recognizes there's privacy rights for data subjects and gives individuals more control of the data they loan to organizations. As an organization, important to understand these rights. So here's some of the rights. I, as a subject, have a right to be informed. I have a right to access the information you're collecting on me. I have a right to rectify, have you corrected if it was wrong and it hurt me, or erase it, restrict your processing of it, control the portability of the data. This US does it especially with medical data. Right to object to things, rights in relation to automatic decision-making and profiling. Oh, you just decided you were going to deny me a credit record or double my interest rate because I happen to live in Moscow, Idaho. Yeah, I can, that's automated decision-making, that's profiling, and I should be able to deal with that, because that profiling deals with about personal data you collected about me, and then put me into a lump group. So those are all the things they like to look at with this. And just think, as I'm going through all this, what are the technological controls to help with all these things? Let's see. US had a Privacy Act in '74, had smaller versions of these same things. We have a range of other privacy laws. I thought I had more. Nope, I had more slides in this. Almost, I think I'll stop there. Because I'm out of time. I thought I was going to get this done. 10 more slides. Okay, I'll finish this off Wednesday, and then we'll move on to the next section. Any questions, comments? I dumped a lot at you. I'm sorry. I was going to open up for discussion, but there's more in here. I kept adding more as I was writing these slides. So let me do my stop share.
I actually did have a question on going back to cybercrime and talking about like bug bounty programs and, security research, as you mentioned. How much of that, I guess, like when adjudicating those laws like the Computer Fraud Abuse Act, how much does intent factor into punishment, or does like participating in a bug bounty program give you legal protection?
Well, bug bounty program or sponsored by the companies, they lay out the rules and said, we are giving you permission to do these things against these products, these sites, whatever. That's what gives you the protection.
Okay, that makes sense.
Now, there are some people who say, hey, we'll give you a bug bounty if you find a bug anywhere on anybody's product anywhere. Then it's a little more iffy.
Right.
So any more reading science or Quizmas? Yes, I will be working those out. My conference started at 7 this morning, so I haven't put those together yet. And it was yesterday too, 9 to 2 yesterday. So, and people were still working on the exam this weekend. I didn't want to post anything before they were done the exam. So I will do some stuff on chapter 6 stuff. I think some quiz on chapter 5 too. So, but we're just finishing chapter 6 material now. So, all right. Any other questions, comments, concerns? All right.